Do you think you could survive the horrors of Resident Evil 7? Picture this. You're trapped in a disgusting mansion fighting against killer fungi that take over human bodies, just like cordyceps do to ants in real life, while running from an entire family of psychopaths who simply refuse to die. This game doesn't just scare you with monsters. It puts you in first-person terror, where every wound could be fatal, and where biology becomes pure fiction. But could the human body actually handle what Ethan Winters goes through? Today, we're going to find out if someone like you would have any chance in this nightmare. Let's start by understanding what would really be necessary to survive the beatings that Ethan takes. Imagine yourself in his place, walking through a house falling apart, when suddenly, someone rips your hand off with a chainsaw. Right after, you get an axe straight through your chest. You lose gallons upon gallons of blood, way more than any person would survive in real life. And yet, you're standing minutes later, as if nothing happened. For Ethan, this is just another Tuesday. But how does he endure so much suffering that would kill anyone instantly? Right at the beginning, Ethan's left hand gets chopped off. In the real world, losing a hand almost always leads to brutal hemorrhaging and hemorrhagic shock, requiring immediate surgery. And it doesn't always work. Even if surgery saves your life, recovery takes months. But in Resident Evil 7, Ethan just goes and staples his hand back on with some surgical clamps and starts moving it around like it's normal. This is only possible because of the game's big trick: infection by the mold created by the organization called the Connections. This fungal bioweapon can regenerate tissues almost instantly. As the game progresses, Ethan gets impaled by metal bars, beaten, crushed, and survives trauma that would destroy any human body. There's a scene where a metal bar goes straight through his abdomen. In real life, this causes fatal organ damage and extremely high risk of infection. The organs in that region, like the liver and intestines, are super irrigated. If you puncture those organs, it's internal bleeding for sure and quick death. But for Ethan, the mold fixes everything almost instantly, preventing him from dying from wounds that would be lethal in minutes. Another thing Ethan seems to ignore is pain. A normal person would pass out from pain after losing a hand or getting a metal bar through their stomach. Extreme pain can induce a state of neurogenic shock, where the body simply shuts down because it can't handle the suffering. But Ethan? At most, he lets out a grunt, makes a face, and continues. It's as if the mold blocks pain signals in his nervous system, allowing him to keep fighting when anyone else would be unconscious. Then there's the blood issue. In real life, losing up to a third of your blood volume is enough to leave someone unconscious or dead. The lack of oxygen in tissues leads to multiple organ failure in minutes. But in Ethan, the mold seems to replace damaged tissue with a fungal version, maintaining all vital functions. In real science, we're advancing with stem cells and tissue engineering, but nothing comes close to the total and rapid regeneration that Ethan shows. The mold is pure fiction, but it's inspired by the way certain fungi can invade living tissues and manipulate them. In other words, without the mold, no one would survive what Ethan goes through. Hemorrhaging, organ damage, and pain shock alone would kill even the most resistant human beings. Resident Evil rewrites the limits of the human body, turning Ethan into a kind of superhuman. But it only makes sense with the context of a world dominated by bioweapons. Even so, surviving doesn't mean he's safe, because the mold keeps Ethan alive, but doesn't make him invincible. And the biggest threats are still to come, especially when he has to face the Baker family, each one more bizarre than the last. Think Ethan is the only weirdo? Well, the Baker family is a whole different chapter, and you can clearly see how the mold transforms human beings into something completely different. Let's understand a bit about each of their powers, starting with Jack Baker. The guy literally breaks through walls, lifts giant objects effortlessly, and even after being exploded, sliced, or burned, comes back to chase you. The secret is in the mold. which acts on his cells, promoting regeneration so fast that fatal wounds close in seconds. In real life, some fungal species can regenerate damaged structures, but never on such an absurd level. Our bodies don't have this capacity because human tissues have limitations in cellular repair, especially when there's damage to vital organs. Marguerite Baker is a walking nightmare. She undergoes bizarre mutations, growing elongated limbs and releasing swarms of insects. This fusion between human organism and insect characteristics is based on the game's biological license. Some fungi, like cordyceps, can influence insect behavior, almost as if they take control of their bodies. The idea of fungus creating structures similar to insect appendages isn't completely absurd in fiction, but in reality, it could never occur so drastically or quickly in humans. Lucas Baker, the son, is also affected by the mold, but in a different way. He maintains part of his consciousness but becomes a sadistic master of traps. The game suggests that the mold also messes with neurotransmitters and brain functions. In real fungi, there are toxins capable of altering behavior in animals, but nothing reaches the point of creating super-intelligent psychopaths who set up deadly traps. This, of course, is a good dose of poetic license from the game. In all of them, the mold creates an almost nervous system that interconnects infected organisms. In nature, some fungi really do form networks called mycelia, capable of transmitting chemical signals, like an underground internet. The game takes this idea to the extreme, transforming the entire house into a living organism connected by the mold. So, however absurd it may seem, the scientific basis for some aspects of the Baker family exists, but on a microscopic scale and much less scary. Resident Evil 7 takes these real ideas and transforms them into grotesque terror that defies any notion of biology. Now tell me, do you think you could face the Baker family if you were thrown into this nightmare? Their abilities are light years above any real threat you'd face in real life. Jack, for example, smashes walls with his fist and throws heavy objects without even breaking a sweat. And the worst part? After being blown to pieces, he comes back whole. Science explains that his cells, powered by the mold, regenerate at a speed impossible for humans. Marguerite becomes a creature that's half human, half insect, with giant arms and capable of summoning swarms of insects. Facing this isn't just about courage. It's fighting against something that completely ignores the laws of biology. Then you think, okay, just grab a weapon and solve it, right? In Resident Evil 7, Ethan gets by with what he finds: pistols, shotguns, even an improvised flamethrower. In theory, a shotgun could level the playing field, but against Jack, it barely makes a difference. You can empty the entire clip and he simply gets up. The mold makes him almost unstoppable, unless you hit very specific points. And then there's another detail. Hitting your target in stressful situations is almost impossible. Even trained professionals suffer from tremors, blurred vision, and racing hearts in real gunfights. Now, imagine shooting at a nearly 7-foot monster running towards you, screaming, while the floor is covered in black mold. Forget it. Your hands would shake so much, you wouldn't even be able to pull the trigger. Even if you manage to shoot, weapons aren't just about pulling the trigger. The flamethrower is another example. In the game, it seems super effective, but in real life, an improvised flamethrower is heavy, difficult to handle, and extremely dangerous, especially in enclosed spaces. And you'd still have to deal with hot vapor, explosion risk, and the chance of burning yourself alive. But weapons are half the problem. The other half is the Bakers themselves. Completely unpredictable. Jack attacks nonstop, ignores pain, and doesn't hesitate about anything. Marguerite transforms, crawls on walls, ambushes you from unexpected angles. They don't get tired, don't feel fear, and always seem to know where you are. And even when you manage to land a hit, they simply regenerate and come back more dangerous than before. So in practice, fighting them would be suicide for an ordinary person. Without combat training, the only viable strategy would be to avoid confrontation. Hide, walk silently, and hope they don't find you. In the game, Ethan spends a good part of the time hiding from Jack, stuffing himself into closets, or crouching behind furniture. And this isn't just game mechanics, it's pure survival. If you're at a disadvantage, the best chance is to not be seen. But even hiding isn't easy. The house is full of traps, suspicious noises, and narrow paths. Marguerite can release insects to sniff you out, and Jack knows every inch of the mansion. And the more time you spend being hunted, the more your mind breaks down. Fear paralyzes, scrambles your reasoning, and makes even the simplest decisions seem impossible. In real life, most people wouldn't last long. The combination of relentless enemies, lack of effective weapons, and psychological terror would finish off anyone quickly. Each encounter is another test of nerves and creativity, and the smallest mistake can be fatal. And this isn't even the worst part, because even if you escape the Baker family, you'd still have to deal with the house full of traps and deadly puzzles. And then another question arises. Could you solve complex puzzles while someone wants to kill you around every corner? Surviving in the Baker Mansion isn't just about shooting monsters. It's about keeping your head on straight when everything conspires to drive you insane. The house is a maze of locked doors, hidden keys, and traps that appear out of nowhere. And to make it worse, there are puzzles that, in the game, seem simple, but in real life would be almost impossible. Imagine having to go through a narrow duct full of traps just to get a puzzle piece, knowing that Jack might be hunting you on the other side. And all this without ammunition, almost without healing items, and with your heart jumping out of your chest. Solving puzzles under this pressure? Forget it. Fear freezes reasoning. Even silly puzzles become mysteries when your life depends on it. Even trained professionals make mistakes under stress. Firefighters, soldiers, paramedics study for years to act under pressure and still make slip-ups. Now imagine someone without preparation, surrounded by monsters and deadly puzzles. The chance of freezing or making wrong decisions would be gigantic. And the limited inventory just makes everything worse. Do I take bullets or leave space for a key? Dropping ammunition could cost your life later. In real life, just this choice would be torment. In the game, Ethan seems like a cool genius, but an ordinary person in there would be shaking so much they couldn't even turn a key. Being exposed to the mold in Resident Evil 7 isn't just catching a disease, it's having every cell in your body invaded by a bioweapon created by the connections, replacing human tissue with a bizarre fungal network. The result? People turning into aggressive, almost unstoppable monsters. The molded, those black creatures that appear out of nowhere, were people before this happened. In real life, nothing comes close to this. There are fungi, like cordyceps, which invade ants' bodies, control their movements, and make them climb to high places where the fungus explodes to spread spores. But in humans, nothing like this happens. The most we have are molds like Stachybotrys, which cause respiratory problems, headaches, and mental confusion, but never turn anyone into a monster. The game exaggerates real concepts. Fungi create mycelium networks underground, exchanging chemical signals. Resident Evil takes this and transforms it into a living weapon, capable of reshaping flesh and mind. In real life, fungi don't have this power. If you were infected, the consequence would be terrible. In the game, the mold replaces tissues, distorts the body, and erases your identity. Even the mind disappears, replaced by blind rage. Fungi are already difficult to fight because they share many similarities with ourselves. What happens to Ethan is pure fiction. Any ordinary person infected would die quickly or become something unrecognizable. The mold would be a nightmare without a cure. Ethan's survival in Resident Evil 7 shows how much the game distorts reality. He beats biology at every corner. No one would survive having limbs torn off, being impaled, and living under constant psychological terror without becoming mincemeat. The absurd regeneration provided by the mold and the demands of the plot are what allow this superhuman resistance. There's no willpower or courage that saves someone from taking a chainsaw to the chest and continuing to stand as if it were just another Tuesday. But here's the thing that makes this even more terrifying. The game actually draws from real science. The way fungi can take over organisms, create networks, and manipulate behavior. It's all based on actual research. If fungi can do this to insects, what's stopping them from evolving to affect larger organisms? The answer is complexity. Human brains and bodies are incredibly complex compared to ants, but that doesn't mean it's impossible forever. So the question remains, do you think you'd have a chance of surviving Resident Evil 7 in Ethan's shoes? The honest answer is, probably not. Without the mold's regeneration keeping you alive, the first major injury would be game over. A normal person would die from blood loss, shock, or infection long before facing the Baker family's final forms. And even if you somehow survived the physical trauma, the psychological horror would likely break your mind. But that's what makes Resident Evil 7 so brilliant. It takes real scientific concepts and pushes them to their absolute extreme, creating a horror experience that feels just plausible enough to be genuinely terrifying. The game doesn't just ask, what if monsters were real? It asks, what if the monsters were us, transformed by the very biological systems we're only beginning to understand? Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you believe you'd last even an hour in the Baker Mansion? And if you enjoyed this blend of science with pop culture and terror, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next video, where science meets your worst nightmares.